It's now on air.
Wait about 5 seconds.
It's live.
I'm David Passmore, and I'm here at the University of North Texas to talk about research that I've completed at Penn State University. It's about linking production, consumption, employment, and skills. It's kind of a systematic look at those things. And it's about 25 years of research using various models. I've been doing this kind of work since most of you weren't born in 1975 or so. But it's only recently when we've had advanced computing power that we've been able to carry out a lot of this research. And it sounds like some sort of tour of person's, career, and it is. But what I did here is not really that unusual. The models I'm going to talk about and the ways that these are done are very common. Economic models are used extensively, and the only difference here is that we put these into an applied setting. So it's not so much research on the models, it's the application of the models to actual problems. And behind eating cookie over there behind the camera is Rose Baker. Rose and I worked together still work together, but we worked together about 13 years with these models and a variety of other things. So a lot of what I'm talking about is actually related to work that Rose and I have done. So I want to go over this 25 years of economic and demographic policy research and talk a little bit about how hard that is to get done in the College of Education when it looks like economics. So what I want to do today is give you a little background on something we called originally the Penn State Economic Modeling and Forecasting Project. And we're using a model that's called an input-output model. And I'm going to go through kind of a non-mathematical explanation of that in kind of a simple spreadsheet form. And I'll give you some examples of the variety of work that we've done with the model. And as I say, a lot of this has included Rose. So a little bit on the background. In the 1990s, there was a coalition of faculty members initiated something called the Penn State Economic Modeling and Forecasting Project. And this is a diverse group of people. This did not include the Department of Economics. In order to get tenure in the Department of Economics, you have to start your paper with imagine a thrice differentiable convex curve. That's how the paper has to start. They really get all of their work done in their work for theoretical things. But around our campus, there are a lot of people who are interested in applied economics and applied demodeling. And so we have people from mineral economics, geography, industrial economics, forestry, demography, and of course in education. And the common link that brought us together was this analytical model, which is called input-output analysis. This was developed by a Russian-born economist who settled finally in the United States in New York City. His name is Vasily Leontief, and he won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1973 for doing this. So I want to put the place where it is. We applied it like a lot of people. Vasily Leontief is the person who put this together. So I'll go through a little input-output modeling. I'm not going to do this mathematically. The mathematics in this are not all that complex, a little matrix algebra, things like that, but there's no reason to go through that since we're not going to be using that model. So I kind of look at the economy as like a big ball of string. It's really large, it's complex, all the strings are intertwined, and unexpected things happen. You pull one part of the ball of string, something wiggles on the other side. Why? How did they get there? And by the way, I picked this out. I'm pretty sure that's in Alpine, Texas. That ball of string. But I was questioning that because I think I would have had a look a lot like John or Jerry Wyszynski, so we don't have the largest ball of string. So anyhow, I think that's the part you start with. When you look at the economy, it's a very large, gangly kind of an object. It's hard to get a handle on for analysis. And so the beauty of Vasily Leontief's work is he organized the entire economy into a series of simple tables. I'm going to show them in a very simple fashion, but these tables can become very large in an entire economy. And this is why they didn't really get advanced too well until we had more modern computers. Give you an idea, in 1975, I was working with these models. We used to have to send a whole bunch of things off to the University of Illinois, and they let them whir on computers over the night with one of their huge computers with tapes and things, and then they'd send us back the errors in the morning. And now in this stuff, we can do, by the time you press the button, you get the whole thing done. So there's very large work. So these input-output tables are used to summarize production in the economy, the goods and services that we make and how we do it, and consumption, how those products are delivered in the economy, and then how employment is. Rose and I used to tell people all the time that it's not a fairy tale. Jobs, the economy creates jobs. It's not the other way around. Somebody doesn't create jobs, then you have the economy. So the economy, jobs are very much dependent. So I'm going to link that to it. The reason we became interested in this, there are lots of reasons to do these things, and there are lots of good scientific reasons these are applied in a lot of areas. We wanted to link production, consumption, and then to employment. And in employment, there are needs for training. I'm going to provide you an example at the end of this where that is tightly linked in the Pennsylvania economy. So that was my interest in this part of the problem. So I will start out with an imagined. I'm not going to do the thrice differentiable concave. This is a simple spreadsheet. And I have in this spreadsheet 4 industries. And when I talk about an industry, we're not talking about firms. We're not talking about establishments. We're really talking about a grouping of goods and services that are homogeneous in some way. So let's say like automobiles. So industries in the national accounting sense are really that way. They're not really about individual firms. And I only have 4 in this, but in the input-output table for the United States, there are about 1,000 different industries. So it's a very large matrix. And so we'll start out with this table and explain some of the parts of it. And so the way this table is organized, the rows of the table are producing industries. These are the industries that are producing goods and services that are eventually consumed by other industries or make their way out in individual final products. And also we have purchasers. Industries also purchase goods and services. So for instance, when your automobile is being made, someplace, somebody is extracting something that's going to be made into iron ore, eventually into steel, or now aluminum for your automobile. So industries need to consume some of the things that are produced so that they can produce other things. So we have purchases. So this table is kind of neatly organized to show producers in the rows, and then in this part of the matrix, the columns are also industries. And this is the production sector of the economy. These are what are called inter-industry transactions. I sell to this other industry. They sell their product to someone else. And eventually this works around into a final product. Sometimes these are called direct requirements. These are the requirements that are needed directly by other industries to produce the goods and services that they have. And so if we look at this here, and the cell in this, again, if you can imagine numbers, usually this matrix is entirely filled with dollars. So what we're talking about is the dollar value during a particular accounting year of goods and services that are sold. So this particular cell, row industry 1 and column industry 2, that's the purchases of industry 2 from industry 1. And that would be some dollar value in that. And so this one is the purchases of industry 3 from industry 2, or industry 2 produces for industry 3. So that table is usually, it is a square matrix of things. Also, some industries buy from themselves. For instance, the coal industry uses some of its output. The automobile industry uses some of its own output. So that this set of transactions then describes all of the things that go on between industries. Some industries produce only for other industries. Some industries produce directly delivered to other people. So they're very important in this case. And if you look at a column of this matrix, for instance, we take industry 1. This is what economists call a production function for an industry. This is like a recipe. If you were to follow the, the purchases that are made by Industry 1 from all the other industries, it's kind of like the recipe for producing Industry 1's product. Now, if you think about that, that can change quite a bit. We have an oil crisis, we have a gas glut, we have all kinds of things go on. But that's a production function. And usually industries are trying to make that production function more efficient so that they can use fewer inputs to produce the same level of output. So that's kind of that side of it. Now, what happens in the economy is that this making and using things is a big kind of a tornado of activity. And so one industry selling to another, that industry is making something, they sell it to somebody else, and it may come back into the other industry. So this is going on during any year. There's a lot of this inter-industry activity. It's multiplying itself throughout the economy. Okay. And this goes round and round. So that's the production sector. Now, consumption in this case, I have one column here, which I'm calling final demand. And that is a term that's used to indicate goods and services that are sold directly by the industries directly to consumers. So in other words, the automobile industry sells directly to households and to businesses. So it's all part of the final consumption. So this shows that some products and goods and services are consumed by other industries. Some are delivered directly to consumption. This is called final demand. If you read the papers and you read about gross domestic product, this is our gross domestic product in the United States. And that's composed of about 4 major categories. Now, if I were to list all of the final demand, all of the consumption expenditures that we were using a list on 500 or 600 of these kinds of things. It gets right down to clickers and all sorts of things. But there are 4 major categories. Personal consumption expenditures are goods and services that we buy that are purchased by households. And about 62% of the economy is consumed by that. We produce to sell to mainly the households. Also, governments purchase some goods and services, so it's about 12% of that. Those can be divided into defense and non-defense expenditures. And this is why the level and kind of defense expenditures become usually very important in the economy, as the different kinds of things are purchased. Also, some of this product goes to investment. Now, this isn't like Wall Street. When I say investment, those are products and services that are prepared but sold during some later period, kind of like mothball, that way. It's also investments are also things like housing. So that's where housing is accounted for. And then we have exports. I guess we're spending a lot of time thinking about exports now. But in this kind of a model, it's usually exports net of imports. So we talk about exports are actually net exports. So this is what we call final demand. And each industry then has a different pattern of things that they sell to various parts for consumption. And so when you add all these things up, the production, consumption equals the total output of the economy. Now, what we usually read about is the final demand. We usually hear every month about whether their gross domestic product, or every quarter whether the gross domestic product is going up or down. But actually, to produce that stuff for consumption, the economy has to do a lot more as total output. So this is why many times, I'll give you one example, if you have a coal mine and you produce coal that is delivered to other industries or delivered directly to households, in order to do that, that coal mine had to buy gas, they had to buy trucks, they had all those things. So the total output produced by that coal industry is bigger. This is why having an industry situated in a place, for instance, this building multiplies itself because there are vendors and other people, and then also all of you spend your money for retail goods in the economy. So there's what's called a multiplier effect that goes on. So we have production sector plus consumption is equal to total output, and this is the entire accounting sense. And usually these models are available for a particular year. Now let's get into the adult part of the conversation here about where the jobs come from, the birds and the bees. How are jobs created under this kind of a vision? And this is all part of the accounting. So jobs are created because the total output of any industry is produced by a mix of resources. And so labor is one of those resources, but it could take land and other kinds of capital goods to do that. And human capital, that human capital is the capacity to produce goods and services, is required to produce these things. So you have to have people in this. And so people with other resources create this economic output. So the jobs are created because we have economic activity. And so, for example, in each industry, it takes a certain number of people to create $1 worth of output in that industry. Let's think of it that way. And if it takes 0.001 workers to produce $1 worth of economic output, then $1 billion of economic output means 1 million jobs. And so this is how we account for the jobs that are required in industries. And so this can change quite a bit. We have technological change, we have artificial intelligence moving in, we have all kinds of things here. So we have changes in labor, the amount of labor that it takes to get something done. Or the economy might change so that we now prefer to have PCs rather than calculators, and that changes employment in those industries also. So it changes the kinds of things we make, and the kinds of things that, and the amount of things we make drives the amount and kinds of jobs that we have in this. And so occupational employment, in other words, what kind of work that you do is related to this total output. So different laborers use different industries use various labor intensities. It used to be we talk about having labor intensive industries. It used to be that agriculture was a labor intensive industry. It's getting more to be a capital intensive industry. That's because labor used to create most of the output. And so those industries use different occupations. If you're in healthcare, there are different things that the different jobs that are created rather than if you're in agriculture. And so this occupational employment can be differed by industry too. And so that different kinds of occupational employment is created when people use their unique human capital to produce goods and services. And that's all driven by production and consumption in the economy and the level and kinds of things that are produced. And so now I've kind of passed by all the math on this. The math isn't all that deep, but the mathematics that we used in this is a total equation accounting system, a breakdown of the economy into these things. And Rose and I had two economic models that we use. One is very commonly used all over the United States and all over the world. It's called IMPLAN, Impact for Planning and Analysis. And we had data on the entire US economy and an input-output table. We had data on the entire state of Pennsylvania, and we had data on every county. So we had an input-output table for every county in Pennsylvania. The other, that's kind of the low price spread. That's about a $5,000 to $10,000 impact or bill. The other model we used is a very sophisticated model that is was called the REMI model, Regional Economic Models Incorporated. We worked with them very closely. We had almost $300,000 to $400,000 invested in that model along the way, very expensive stuff. But the feature in that is that it did a couple of things. Is that it helped us forecast final demand in the economy. It also allowed us to examine things like what if, questions about what if the labor intensity changed. It also linked to demography too. And demography is a big part of this. The way it linked in that modeling and the mathematics is that the demography is driven in some ways by economic change. So for instance, that your decision to migrate from this county to the next county is in some ways driven by the opportunity you have for jobs and income. And likewise, when things go bad, people move. And so in a way, demography, and we're not talking about, in some ways, perhaps births and deaths. We're really talking about migration in those cases. But so the model we had a complete demographic model in it that modeled births, deaths, and everything in between. And we used it for one of the studies. Now, these types of input-output tables, the ones that we had acquired and were using, are good for three things. One is you can look at it and say, aha, that's how it works. So the other is for forecasting. You can say, well, if it looks like this now, what will it look in the future? So economic forecasters use models like these to project ahead what the gross domestic product might be, or whether the automobile industry will be going up or down. The other is something we used extensively, is in, I'm going to call them what if simulations. And basically, these are what economists and a lot of other people call counterfactuals. A counterfactual is an expression of a conditional proposition containing an if clause that's contrary to fact. Now, that's to say, what happens if this campus were shut down? And that's one example. It's not probably favorite, but okay. What happens if we buy more electric cars rather than gas cars? So that's a kind of counterfactual. It's because you're thinking about it as kind of a thought experiment. There are a couple of books, and I think there's a movie or series out about this now. There's a counterfactual, historians use these all the time. What would have happened if Hitler and the Axis had won the war? What would the world look like? Okay? So these counterfactuals are quite common in a lot of intellectual research. So I think it's an example. What happens if the tax policy changes? What happens if we have a natural disaster, tornado comes through? What if an innovation in healthcare interrupts our patterns of human morbidity and mortality? International trade, I guess this isn't so abstract anymore. What if international trade is affected by regulation or currency changes? I guess that's the one we're thinking about fiddling with. Or what happens if we change policies for immigration? Remember, we're looking at this whole thing, this whole economic and demographic model is that big ball of string. And the way this model works is that if you wiggle one end, something happens over here. These models help you trace the way that those will happen. So, and basically the methodology we use is a very simple kind of a methodology. And this is kind of like a thought experiment. This is not meant to project what is likely to happen, but so what we did, first of all, is we took the whole baseline economy. This is what the economy looks like now. And if kind of a plain vanilla change occurred, this is how it might look in the future. And then we create a structure of the economy that interjects that what if question. We perturb the economy in a way that it changes its looks. The difference between the baseline and the status quo plain vanilla piece and the perturbed economy is the effect of the policy. Now, we've done a lot, I'll show you what some of the studies are. We've done a lot of different work, but this is the basic methodological approach that we had to use in this. And so we had to use, we had to learn quite a bit about running these models and about the mathematics and all the other kinds of economics and demography that go behind it. But at the same time, we applied all these to different kinds of problems, which kind of, for Rose and I, we had to deal with everything from metallurgy to teenage births to, well, I'll show you. It's applicable to a lot of situations. So I'll give you a few examples of what we've done, and I'm going to take you deeper into one that was, I think was done a while ago, but I think it has some currency. So here are some examples of things that we have done with these models. We have examined what if Pennsylvania adopted California pollution standards. Rose and I completed a study of table eggs in Pennsylvania. Met all kinds of chickens and farmers during their time. Fortunately, in the winter, I went to the chicken farm. So it was a little, not quite as obnoxious. Looked at what happens, what are the effects, what happens if literacy changes in the economy? We did a study of adolescent fertility. You remember there, a number of years ago, there was a lot of talk about how teenage fertility was killing the economy. And so we examined, we said, well, let's change teenage fertility. So we actually changed the fertility rates of teenagers by about a percentage point to see how it affected the economy. And by the way, it did cause people to have more welfare, but on the other hand, decline in consumption in the future because of declines in population. We looked at engineering shortages, technical skills deficits. We had a company move into Pennsylvania, and they said, we're going to put 500 jobs in the community where Rose used to live, which was primarily on retail trade a little bit and tourism seasonal. So to have a manufacturing facility in the area with 500 jobs is a big deal. But to do that, they had to have a certain number of precision machinists. It turns out the precision machinists aren't so popular. They had over 3,000 applications for the 500 jobs, but almost no applications for precision machines. They had to turn around and say, because we don't have the right supply of labor that we need to produce our product, we're going to send 300 of these jobs to Mexico. So technical skill deficit. So we're able to model that. Educational reform, we had a lot of really happy broad statements that were made in Pennsylvania about educational reform. We said, well, what happens if it occurs? So we took each of these educational reform propositions and modeled the economic outcomes of these propositions. We've done a lot of different studies in career ed, management. I can't think of some of the things right now that we have. There's a whole bunch of them we've done. We're trying to project employment. Now, you could use state employment service and get projections of employment. But the thing that we did is we say that that's kind of like making a point estimate. That's one idea. But there's a lot of uncertainty and risk in the future. So one of the things we would do is we would do analyses that injected some of that risk into it. So we'd say, what happens if some key factors related to that industry change? How does that affect employment? Since we're in a state that just found that it could exploit natural gas, there was a proposal to get a severance tax. Pennsylvania is the only one of 32 gas-producing states that does not have a severance tax. A severance tax is a tax that's levied because you're severing a natural resource from that local economy. And what we did was quite controversial. Also worked on some town planning. We had our very first contract with this big model was to examine what happens when the military base closes. And looked at certain issues in occupational supply. That's whether you have enough workers to get the job done. Done studies in highway construction, the ski industry, although they didn't take us skiing. We also did a lot of work on the energy workforce. Since Pennsylvania was going to be increasing its output, its total output in the natural gas sector, how will that affect the economy? How many jobs will that create? Will it displace other jobs? And we also had a delightful time in the motorsports track. We actually were in, it was a kind of a funny thing. Well, anyhow, we in order to deliver the report, we had to go on a Sunday morning, and we're in a road rally
with Ducatis and Maseratis and Ferraris.
And I'm going through the red lights and everything, and then we delivered the talk on the Sunday morning at a champagne brunch, which is the most unique thing. The main speaker that day was a championship motorsports guy. We were kind of the same. Anyhow, it was kind of interesting. We worked on plastics jobs. I was seeing the other day, people used to say, plastics is the big thing, the Mrs. Robinson thing. Now people are saying AI in that same place. We did a big study of general aviation in the United States and in various areas. We looked at the extent that royalty income from gas would change things in Pennsylvania. The tourism studies. We had a request to look at what happens if they construct electrical lines in Pennsylvania, which nobody liked in Pennsylvania at all. I mean, they liked the electrical lines. We were just telling them what would happen if they built them. Cosmetology jobs. It's the only area where I've had a death threat. Actually, a legitimate death threat in this. At the time, we were looking at, you may remember, before there was a lot of accounting for available for loans, there was a lot of loan fraud and a lot of default. Cosmetology, proprietary cosmetology schools were at the locus of a lot of this. They had very high default rates, over 30%. And also, they were in the business for a while. Some of them were manufacturing Social Security numbers so that they could get students enrolled, get them a loan, and then these students would, deadbeats there. They left, couldn't be found. So they had gotten the loan money and paid for stuff. There's a lot of that going on. So we decided to do this, and when we started doing this, they complained that we shouldn't be allowed to do this because we didn't know anything about cosmetology. I thought it was perfect. I had no skin, no hair, and nothing. But also, it turns out that we had on our research team a woman who's one of my PhD students who was a licensed cosmetologist. So anyhow, we went through a lot of that, and we had a huge number of complaints that came into the president's office that we were doing this. And I got one. I remember it was a Saturday. I opened it up. It was one of those things where they pasted the letters on. It said, "Come to Pittsburgh, we'll shoot you." They didn't offer to cut my hair. Anyway, so I thought that was interesting. We've done things at book. We did a whole bunch of work on manufacturing forecasts. when people wanted to start vehicle emission testing in Pennsylvania, analyze that. Now that we have natural gas, we have great opportunities for ethane cracking. Studied that. Um, Big deal in Pennsylvania a couple of years ago was the elimination of electricity price caps. In other words, they're going to remove the caps and allow the market to decide what the price of electricity would be. That was very controversial. We jumped in on that. Also, we did a study of the 1994 baseball strike, which is kind of interesting. And also, we did a study of healthcare reform, which I'll kind of go into in a little more detail. We also produced over 100 what we call economic and workforce briefs. And these are reports that were meant to be read by people and understood by journalists on one page about an issue. They tried to describe how a change in the community would affect jobs, income, and taxes, which really are the kinds of things people would talk about around their table. And the thing that was unique about this, we applied these models, we developed, we workflowed the process. And what we did with this is we were able to respond with a report in 45 minutes after something happened. When we give you an example, we did a study of Hershey. There's a signature Pennsylvania firm, Hershey Foods. Hershey Foods announced one day that they were going to get rid of 1,400 jobs in Pennsylvania, and it was a big blow in terms of the number of jobs. It was also kind of a big shock in terms of Pennsylvania legacy. So when we heard that, we instantly modeled the loss of 1,400 jobs in 2 counties in which this occurred. We had a report out, and we had a report out before the governor's task force could even react to this. And so within 45 minutes, we had an analysis. Now, this isn't meant to kind of dig into details. It's meant to highlight the things that are going to happen. In this case, there were 1,400 jobs lost at that factory, but what was it, 3,500 jobs total. And Rose was on the radio talking about this on public radio one morning at drive time, and she mentioned that not only would the 1,400 Hershey Foods people lose their jobs, and they would get assistance because their jobs were being eliminated because the company was going someplace else. But there were a whole bunch of other people in the community who did accounting and had other firms. Their jobs were connected to that big ball of string to Hershey Foods. So she mentioned on the radio, as part of the interview, that those people don't have access to the special government support. And an official of the Pennsylvania Department of Labor, this happened, we were interviewed one day, it was on 7:30 in the morning. By 10 to 8, the official from the Pennsylvania Department of Labor called the president's office, demanded that we stop talking about this.
Wanted to know there was a woman's voice on the radio that made this comment. I wanted to know who it was and why they had said it. And then the person went back and listened to the entire radio part and said, oh yeah, she's right. And then wasn't quite so upset.
Well, we had about 100 of these studies that were done, and we used to do approximately one a week. And these are in every county in Pennsylvania, almost every county, I think, and almost every major industry. So when something would happen, we would have a report. I think that so we had this flow charted, so when we found out about it, we would specify the model, run the data, get the data back in, and within 45 minutes, we were able to distribute the report to over 1,500 news outlets and other places and offices, so that the idea was to kind of stimulate some interest in the impact of the problem. So that's, we have a lot of those. There's one in class products and class manufacturing. Okay, now I'm going to give you, this will wind it up. I'll give you a little more detailed thing. This is from our high price model, the one that costs us eventually about $400,000 to run. And this is about how national healthcare spending could affect employment, changes in that could affect employment in Pennsylvania. And this was something we did, this was the last time we talked about healthcare reform. Some of you probably weren't around at that time, or maybe all of us had hair at that time. This is the time when Hillary Clinton was leading the charge to have this healthcare reform. And everybody had a proposal. There was something like 24 major proposals we counted for how healthcare spending could be reformed. And so during that time, things had changed in the healthcare industry. Technology had been improved, changed the demand for things. Also, there was a steady increase in healthcare spending as a proportion of gross national product. There were lots of people at that point who were formerly insured who were becoming uninsured. And also, this generated a lot of debate over healthcare funding that would occur. And as I say, we counted about 24 different national healthcare reform proposals that all had, most of these had budgetary implications for how we spend our money in healthcare. And we were fortunate to work closely with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they considered each one of these and developed spending scenarios in the economy. Now, we didn't want to model 24 different proposals. So what we did is we took the proposal, kind of took a composite of proposals, which was the high spending scenario, and another one we would call a low spending scenario. And so what we tried to do is look at how sensitive jobs and training in Pennsylvania would be to these national changes, because change at the national level gets pushed down the local economies. And so we set up two counterfactuals that represented the high and low national spending scenarios that we pushed down into Pennsylvania. Let's see if I can get this to, I'll give you an idea what, these may sound naive at the time, but they were pretty accurate at that point. Okay, the low spending scenario could arise from a variety of circumstances, like increased use of HMOs, greater efficiency in the health system through coordination and all these things. It's interesting that the low spending scenario was still an increase in healthcare expenditures. The high spending scenario said, look, we got this technology, everybody needs to be saved, there can be no rationing of this, we're going to insure people who are uninsured. Heard that manifest recently, right? And so the high spending scenario was the top part. It was, we weren't going to slow down anything. And we would increase our expenditures and would not curtail these expenditures by healthcare, by cutting things. So these are the two spending scenarios. And there were, in between those, there were a range of opportunities. So what we're doing is modeling the low and the high part of this. And this, there was a lot of math, a lot of tables on this, but this is an example here. We have these major health occupations categories, and these are groupings of occupations. So this is the kind of summary. So under the low spending scenario, employment would decline somewhere between 13 and 14%. There it is. In the high spending scenario, it would go up by almost a third. So we have the low spending scenarios kind of costing us jobs, the high spending scenarios creating a lot of jobs. Now, I'm going to focus on one occupation just to play out what this meant for education and training. And by the way, in healthcare training, there are lots of, there's a lot of certification, there's a lot of licensing, you know, it takes a lot if you want to have a training program. A lot of times there's a lot of capital that you have to purchase or have access. It takes a lot. If you're going to provide a training program for radiologic technologists, it's going to take some planning and it's going to take some capital, and it takes time. If you want to increase programs for nurses, you've got certification issues, all kinds of things that can really clog up the pipeline. So let's look at one occupation here, dental hygienists. And so remember what we're saying is that there's two national scenarios. Healthcare spending could be at this low end or the high end in the United States that gets pushed down to Pennsylvania. What does that do to employment? We see that there's vast differences. Now this is for dental hygienists. And under one scenario, we had to project this ahead. So under one scenario, we had 1,800 fewer hygienists by 2005, this was. So that'd be fewer. The other one is 4,200 hygienists. Now, if you were a school director or proprietary school owner or would-be owner, and you looked at this, you'd say, I don't know. In one case, there aren't going to be any jobs for people who come out. In the other case, we're going to be overwhelmed. Now, that is the definition of risk. Risk is when we know the probability of an outcome. Uncertainty is when we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainties. But in this case, we can kind of quantify the risks. Under these conditions, not until I knew exactly what healthcare position the United States would take, I wouldn't start a program because there's just too much risk. I could either be dead or I could be a hero in this case. So that was the kind of outcomes. And of course, nothing. But now we're in the new era, right? So that's, I suppose we could do this again. But that's an example of how we used our high-end economic model to make changes in the economy that are the what-if questions that we can get out and get answers to these kinds of things. And and have opportunities for policy discussions about these things. And we spent a great deal of time when we produced these things to make sure that we hit all kinds of people. It's one thing to write a report that's filled with that. Again, I don't know how many people every day seek to find the article, the economics article that says the thrice differentiable. Nobody's looking for those things, but if you can put this into a language that people understand, it has more of a chance. So we spent a lot of time, and we worked with journalists. Rose and I had a local column in a business newspaper that covered almost all of Pennsylvania. We produced 52 articles that were between 900 and 1,300 words, and they take us 2 days to write. Shouldn't be surprised if those of you write, you know how that comes out. But they were meant to translate these economic analyses into forms that people who would be interested would understand. We were fairly successful. So we did a bunch of these things. You know, one I like the most is what the title of the article is: "What happens if the sun hurls itself at the Earth?" It was kind of look at the problem of electromagnetic bursts. What do we do to the economy? So we spent a lot of time so that we could put the information out there where the codes could be. I guess there's sheep. So anyhow, that's an example here. So in a nutshell, that's what I wanted to tell you about. It's kind of a quick thing, but I've tried to pull all the math out. But we've done this for quite a while, and just on the politics of this, it's not easy to explain in the College of Education why you have an interest in economics and other things. Well, Rose and I worked with a grand gentleman who's now deceased, and his advice to faculty members at that time was that they should find a small slipper that their foot fits into and not do anything else. You know, maybe you do a scaffolding. That's all you do your whole life. And that works. I mean, a lot of careers work that way. But this doesn't fit, because you can see from the topics we had to be involved. We had to be able to stand not only toe-to-toe with people in economics, but we also had to be able to stand toe-to-toe with people in the industries, people who knew something about powdered metallurgy or electricity rates, and the Public Utility Commission. So it was kind of big. And the outcome on all this was really to ask the question, how does the economy affect jobs? What are the implications for training? And we had a hard time explaining that. So we had good reviews outside the College of Education. Deans kept asking, there were more than one. What is this? So we spent a lot of time, but the crucial thing is we brought in was a $7 million research at that time. But we've kind of come to an end to that, because the primary thing is that apparently it's been so difficult for us to process research funds at Penn State, especially funds that come from non-agency sources. So we would have a lot of organizations, the Dominion Gas and Oil, all of the Aircraft Operators and Pilots Association, all of these industrial groups who were trying to give us money. And the university couldn't understand that right outside the NSF kind of funding process. And on the other side, working with industry folks, explain a 50% overhead rate. So anyhow, as I get older here and get less hair and it gets grayer, I found that it's easier for me to work directly with people rather than universities. So that's what it stands. Anyhow, that's it. It's a whole history of things. As I say, it's not unique in terms of methodology. Lots of people do this. Just try to say is that we try to make application. So, thank you. I know they have questions or anything else. So. Yeah, cookies too. Yes,
one quick question.
Yes.
In some countries, I know, especially in Europe, they strictly control the number of PhDs by the funds that they grant to departments by their projected need. Could your model be used for something like that or the modeling approach for something like that in this country?
Yeah, it could. Um, and I know in some of the countries they do pay attention to that. And as a matter of fact, in some countries, not in Europe, you're only allowed to engage in training alternatives that actually look like they're going to fit with the economy. In our economy, we allow people to make those choices. I can see it happening. But in some cases, there have been limits on funds too. And so it could be. But again, the policymaker wants one answer. They want a point estimate. Okay? There's actually an interval estimate that's involved. And sometimes, frankly, the interval estimate is so wide, you don't know. We help to quantify that. Okay? So that's one thing. So usually somebody says, we want to make that decision. Tell us, give us one number. There's no one number. There's a lot of, even though we don't, if we were in the economics department, we'd start this out with on one hand, on the other hand, is a way to describe it. So yeah, that's possible. The other thing that we ran into a lot is that we had a lot of people who have pet projects. They'd say, no, we're gonna have STEM education. Well, how about natural gas? We're gonna have a lot of natural gas. We want you to tell you what fabulous things are going to happen as a result of that. Usually what comes out is in a lot of these studies is that there are marginal changes, small changes in the economy. The Pennsylvania economy is a huge economy. The United States economy is a huge economy. Wiggling one string usually ends up wiggling only one or two strings on the other side. So we were often disappointed in the fact that we didn't have the A-bomb to show for their funding. So there was a lot of different. So a lot of politics in this too.
Well, thank you so much for a wonderful talk. We'll talk more about the eclipse effect.
So I don't know if you have anything else.
One of the projects that we worked with the school superintendents, they had attended this large educational session, and the report had put out with the natural gas that there were going to be 160,000 jobs. And we were like, no, not going to happen. And even working with people in the state level, we projected about 25,000 jobs. These superintendents all met because they were going to change the entire curriculum for this whole STEM education to train people to be gas workers. And it's like, doesn't work like it. And had a lot of descriptions on temporary jobs and permanent jobs. And the permanent jobs they were already training people for. The temporary jobs, there wasn't enough time in order to be able to get that skill set because it was such a specific skill set that was needed so quickly that most of the workers that did the work were from Texas and Oklahoma. They came to Pennsylvania and did that work and then left.
So a lot of this was trying to help people understand the realities of the economy would work in terms of their most favorite idea. In that case, with the idea that you had they were talking about 200,000 jobs, I think.
It changed.
And the industry kept saying, we're going to Pennsylvania lost 200,000 jobs as a result of manufacturing decline. We're going to give them back to you almost instantly. And there wasn't one thing about that statement that was economically true. So we were kind of putting cold water on that when that happened. But a lot of these superintendents were ready to transform the career and technology education and ramp it up so that they could fulfill this need for 200,000 jobs. When in fact, 25,000 jobs is nothing to sniff at, but it's still not 200,000. Yeah, that wasn't popular either. Practically every piece of work that we ever done, somebody hates, somebody likes, all at the same time. Sometimes at least once I'll get the death rate. That's how bad it is.
Well, not to be political, because just looking at what's going on now, all the policies changes. How does this explain what's happening?
Well, just to take as an example, this has already been done with the one model that we use. The question right now of the border tariff on imports, the government is proposing the idea that they'll have a 20% tariff on imports. And it sounds like you say, well, we're going to keep those imports out. And there's no tariff that you have to place on exports. And so, but you got to import things before you can export, because we don't make all the things that we use. That's a complicating factor. And so anytime in economic terms, anytime you raise the price of something, people buy less of it. And so that's one thing. So that's one of the things that could be modeled. The more complicating factor along with that is all these changes are going to affect international trade and currency. So, all of all of this work, for instance, the exported goods are going to cost more, and the people in the other countries will have a dollar that that is going to be higher value. They have a hard time buying it because we can't export it. We can't import their stuff that they can't export stuff to us that easily. And also, these currency changes are big. So right now, what needs to be examined is all the uncertainty. It's right on the face of it. You say, boy, we're going to keep imports out, and we're going to keep jobs in America. In fact, that may be negative. And also, the whole idea of the changing currency used to be the currency was bound up with the gold standard. The Bretton Woods standards were there, and when that was gotten rid of, then countries could change their standards. So, for instance, we have several countries, Germany, Japan, and China among them, that change, they value their currency differently each day. So just that change in currency can change in a moment all the plans that we laid out for having 20% tax. And I have a feeling we're playing at a very tilted poker table too. So it's but anyhow, that's the kind of thing that we have modeled. And probably the outcome of that would be to give you a range of policy outcomes. It's not quite so simple as if you do this, that happens. It never is. It's usually a lot more complicated. Also, asking the question in the future, we don't know what countries will do to value their currency. We know how much they might be able to change. We could model those changes in currency and see what happens. So there is a way to think about this ahead of time with data. If you're a government that's inclined and with facts. See if that looks good. How's that work?
Would it be fair to say that, certainty is the best thing? Right?
Well, I think that one of the value of examining the economy like this is that there is uncertainty. There's risk and uncertainty. There are lots of things that we don't know about that could happen. There's some things we know, we kind of quantify the risks. What this helps policymakers do is to find out a little bit more how complex the policy is in terms of the outcomes that it delivers. I think that's the value of this. And nobody wants to hear that because if you're a politician, because you already know what the solution is. So it makes the dissemination of these ideas very. But there are a whole bunch of analyses of that particular problem that have been done, and they don't bear up to the current facts being delivered from the government. So that's just one aspect of it. Immigration is another big issue, and we actually have ways to model that in the more expensive model we have. Immigration is very important in terms of low skill and high skilled parts of the economy. You want to essentially you want to slow down low skill immigration. I don't know. That has been working very well the last couple of years. Lots of Pennsylvania strawberries not being picked right. Potatoes.
Industry.
And
The tomato industry in Pennsylvania has virtually vanished. It's much slower than it used to be because
Yes, the industries, that's all the workers they have, right?
it kind of neglects that fact that there's a restricted supply. The other thing is on the high end, we have 85,000 H-1B visas available each year. They're gone in a couple of minutes. And so we want to restrict immigration from high end. And our immigration policy is primarily oriented toward family reunion rather than toward the economy. Compare that to Canadian policy, the Australian policy, which is much more oriented toward kind of human capital needs in the country. We have kind of trouble. Also, all of this accounting helps you to figure out whether having immigrants is a cost or a benefit. And a lot of that information is. So those are all part of the model question. And so demography is very important.
You touched on the technical skills deficit. So just yesterday, the other day, I was hearing people talk about, okay, the unemployment rate. A lot of number of people drop out of stop looking for work starting in Canada. Once those actual numbers, economy starts to pick up, once those actual numbers are realized, they were saying that the strain on the economy not lost jobs, but lost people in the skills. Strain on the possibly
Well, I think it depends on the distribution of skills that's out there. I find unemployment to be a very interesting number that we're looking at right now. I think it was our president said that we had a 42% unemployment rate, which I think is there's a lot of complaints about the unemployment rate. To be unemployed, you have to be without a job, you have to be actively seeking work, you have to be available. Those are the three criteria. If you're not doing that and you don't have a job, you're what's called out of the labor force. So a lot of people move between being out of the labor force and unemployed quite a bit. There's a lot of volatility in that. And a lot of that depends on the structure of the way the economies operate. Right now, some of the people who are out of the economy are flowing back in. And who knows what their skill patterns are. Because that's something we don't know that much about. You can start seeking work again, but whether you're going to be qualified for work is important. It's a lot, and the U.S. government provides, our president was talking about how the unemployment rate is really high. Well, Bureau of Labor Statistics, they had all the questions like that when President Nixon was in office. And they wanted them to change the accounting for unemployment. So the Department of Labor actually calculates 14 different unemployment rates. And the one that we see in the paper all the time is unemployment rate that's called U7. The one everybody likes to use when they have trouble is they like to count people who are out of the labor force, which means they don't have work and they're not actively seeking. But what they describe as discouraged workers. Which is a weird term, but these are people who dropped out of the labor force because they just didn't think they could find work because they were disabled, they thought there was discrimination, or they just didn't think they could fit. So that's another thing. So unemployment is a very political number. But the unemployed, people out of the labor force, depends on the area. A lot of, for instance, in the nursing market, one of the incentives there are cash incentives that are often bounties for new nurses, trying to draw people in. That's because there are certified and registered and licensed nurses who are out of the labor force, and they're maybe during prime fertility span, and so this money is meant to bring them back in because they're known to have the skills. They just need to maybe incentive. But there are a lot of other areas where just don't know. Yeah. In other words, like in precision machining, you can put all the incentives out there, but there aren't people who can do it.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye, YouTube. Okay. Thanks for coming.